I'm Lies Volding. The Future Now show is brought to you by the Club of Amsterdam, an international think tank that provides a platform to discuss preferred futures. "3D printing technologies reshaping medicine, global communities where supporting people of every demographic and belief, and a world where marketing has value to people other than advertisers." I'm Lies Volding. These are the playgrounds that we explore in this month's The Future Now show. Mark Petz, Building Balanced Communities. Go ahead, Mark.
Okay, we've heard about many efforts to build utopian existences. Those have been going on for a long time. But we've also all heard of villages. So I don't know which of you grew up in a village, but I grew up in an actual village. I didn't grow up in a city or a town. But many people who grow up in cities and towns, they want to leave those places and actually go and live in a village. So it's often quite romantic. It's not so realistic. But there is a community now, which is in Saxony-Anhalt in Germany, called Balance for Your Life, and it aims to be holistic. So it's using a systems approach and tries to bring in the features you find in an eco-village, but also it's trying to bring in features you find in a global village. So we are globalized. We do live in a global village, as Marshall McLuhan would say, and they want to bring those aspects in.
Intentional communities, retirement complexes, and eco-villages. We've heard of them all. There is a relatively new concept called global villages, combining sustainable settlements with global communication as a backbone and support base. How can we marry all these aspects with our changing demographies and changing mindsets, needs and desires? Perhaps there are possibilities to do this with a project in Germany called Balance for Your Life.
Yes, indeed. That's what we are proving. The new holistic living and housing model, Balance for Your Life, is based on globally available knowledge from all fields, on reliable studies and surveys, updated year upon year, focused on how can we solve most global problems and create a solution for the future of humanity and our planet. Balance for Your Life is a contribution to creating resilient societies.
What do you think? Is it possible that at a village level we can actually still reach this level of technology and internet technology and connectiveness?
That was exactly going to be my question, which is, how do you see this kind of balanced community tangibly evolving, literally from the test pilot that you're looking at to a fully integrated, thriving community that could be replicated, where you have a model that would be adopted by other people who are looking for similar kinds of communities. They want the local connection, they want local support, but they also want to be connected globally with broader members of, for lack of a better word, their tribe.
I can see it working quite successfully, but I think with any intentional community, it's two things. It's a selection of the people, so you've got the right people that can work together, and you also have to have the knowledge to do the things that you want to do in that community. So if you want to have an eco-village, you've got to have people that know about farming. If you don't have anyone who knows about farming, it's not going to work. And this community has, this one in Saxony-Anhalt, has got some of those aspects because the process is going to be done as a co-creation process. So rather than the community that people move into, there's a sorting process with sufficient people who will work together to develop that, guided by people with more expertise in different fields. So this is what Annette Peckrell has told me, and this is what she's now doing. So she's been living there for about 2 months now, and the process is happening over the next 6 months before it's extended to other places. So it's quite a new thing. It hasn't actually existed, but there are plans to make it happen. I have a lot of faith that it can happen, but I also have some realism by the fact that she's looked at other eco-villages, she's looked at other intentional communities, and other kind of demonstration places like Tamara in Portugal, where they've been investigating how can we do this, how can we have sustainable energy. So I think it can happen.
Patrick, you have a comment?
Yeah, I'm very interested in how this squares up with the idea that about half of the population of the world now lives in cities. There's a huge migration towards cities, and cities give you real advantages in terms of economies of scale and opportunity to find work, social opportunity to make friends, etc. So the village, is that something that is this a parallel paradigm that enriches the city-based one, or is it part of the life cycle of the individual? How do you put these two things together?
I think there's two aspects. One aspect is that there's a strong view that's come from Weber, which is the idea that the city is the centre and everything else is the hinterland. Now, he was writing in the late 19th, early 20th century, and that there was a case for that then. I don't say those aspects have disappeared, and if we look at the fastest growing cities in the world, the third world cities, that's certainly still a case in those places. But then we have to look at other factors that are coming in, and the information technology really is a big dynamic. It changes things a lot. A simple example is if you look at Africa, and lots of people said, oh, Africa can't catch up technologically wise. Oh, you know, it'll take years before we can put the phone networks in. They can't afford fiber optic. And now if you look, there are all sorts of innovative things coming out of Africa that are using mobile phone technology. For example, payment on credit, on phone credit. Has been innovative in Africa much more than it has been in other places. And this is what is aimed to happen with this. It has to have the fast internet, it has to have that backbone. But the scale that we talk about has shrunk. It's no longer necessary to be geographically close because you're close in cyberspace. And so that's where I think this can work. That's the first thing. The second thing I think is that you must consider that villages have existed for a long time, and many of them longer than cities. So what are those village features that work, that make them sustainable? Now, as this is a new community, I can't say it's existed for hundreds of years and it demonstrates that. But there are aims in order to revitalize and have a rural renaissance. In this case, when we talk about growing cities and large cities, those are often outside of the West, where we have a different dynamic. We have an aging population, and we have an issue, what do we do about declining and rural decline? And I think here this is a possibility to turn that rural decline around and still be sustainable. Whether it's extendable to many countries where they have suffered that decline, I don't know yet, but I'm hopeful. I would like to hear what, Marlena, what do you think of this? In France, you have a quite strong rural culture. Would it work in France? How do the villages, are they sustainable? Are they viable?
Right now, the villages have been quite deprived of resources. So it is quite the opposite. France is very centralized, and so it would be a major shake-up of the country to get out of the centralization that has occurred, I would say, by essence, you know, since three centuries. Where I see something happening is that we see the big city as a sum of villages. And it is quite interesting to see that in such a small country like France, you in fact have so many disparities, and they are 1 kilometer far apart. So it's not really about this idea of villages, but we are now living in cities which are a sum of villages with very different issues and very different problems. So I think there is a lot to learn from how to make those villages work, so that, you know, people can really, they have same values, same way of living, and which are very different from the one working 1 kilometer next to them. And that could be an interesting way to realize in those big cities of tomorrow, how do we make all these villages, exchange in a proper way. And I think they feel themselves as disconnected as if they would live at a different continent.
That's a very good point. When I lived full-time in San Francisco, which is a moderately sized city, a collision of culture and certainly emerging technology. Going from neighborhood to neighborhood, it was the same as you described with these rural villages. One neighborhood completely separated from the other, and you could see differences in the crime rates from neighborhood to neighborhood. Literally, you'd walk from one block where everybody would stay kind of potted up and have a higher crime rate, and then say in the Tenderloin, and then pop right over to the next area where you had a higher, there was more money, more tech money, lofts, say, and there was not as high a crime rate. So where I'm bringing that to this discussion of villages and communities is we have some real disconnects between people and their wants and needs within bigger cities, within medium-sized cities that are supposedly pioneering, and certainly, as you described, Melina, in the villages themselves. So my question then is, and perhaps again this is more of a messaging question, how do we unite people in our commonalities in creating these kinds of communities at whatever scale more effectively?
Can I come back on that? I think that you can do that on a city level by connecting neighbourhoods with neighbourhoods, but certainly on a village level you can do it by connecting village with village. So you connect villages in parishes, for example. In the past, this was done through the Anglican Church in England, for example, but in many Christian places there was a concept of several villages linking together around a market town. Now, the market towns have disappeared. We don't have markets in the same way anymore. It's supermarkets or home deliveries. But those connections can still be made between the villages. I don't believe you need a town to connect with them. But I do think that those villages have certain conditions and situations that make some more successful than others. So part of those are having a strong centre like a village hall. Part of it's having a school, so there's a community focus. Now, once villages have lost those things, it's very hard to make them successful. They become dormitory towns or they die. The aim with this balance for your life is to try and bring those things in. So the school, the kindergarten, the old people are all part of the community. Now it's very different from a city because having lived in a village, everything is yours. So I'm not a Methodist, but it's still my Methodist chapel. Maybe I don't have any children go to the school, but it's still my primary school because it's in my village. That's quite a hard thing to get to a city because in a city you tend to form communities of interest. But in a village it transcends that, so everything is important. To put one thing across which might be a slightly negative aspect is, I think the villages can work if you have the right community spirit. Now trying to create that, that's what's hopefully going to happen with the co-create process where people have self-selected for wanting to live in this village, and over time they're brought through. There will be a mix of people in this Balance for Your Life project, so we will have volunteers, we will have people who need to earn a living, and retired people. But still, all those people have been selected, self-selected and selected by the co-creation process, and that ignores some of the other people, which may be a problematic aspect. If you took people from the city, from the middle-class, rich areas, and put them together, they have certain commonalities and they also have certain resources. If you try to take a community of everybody, you have to include the criminally minded, you have to include the people who are mentally disabled. Is there the resilience to cope with those people? So the resilience and the viability aspect also are affected by those. So I think in certain communities it can work, but whether this can actually scale to the regional level or the global level, it's too early to say. I would like to think it can, but is it just going to be a self-selection? Is it going to be that all the good people leave everybody else?
Yeah, I was struck by the reference to farming, and it reminds me that one of the things that's most attractive about village life is the proximity to nature and the countryside. But also, you know, it's worth remembering that Henry Ford, I mean, one of his main motivations for getting into the car business, he grew up on a farm. And he considered farming as a business extremely inefficient and very resource intensive. Basically, horses were used for everything. And so his idea was that by mechanizing farming, etc., it would be good for the environment. Now, actually, things turned out in that way to begin with, but then the car took off and totally changed the way the world is organized, and cars were one of the things that led to the development of cities, etc. But I also think that for village life to be viable, there's probably a need to look at the whole way that farming and agricultural production is organized. I mean, there is the phenomenon of urban agriculture. Big cities are venues for agricultural production, and the way that we look at nature and see its productive possibilities nowadays is very different from the way that we looked at it in the past. So I think for this village model to be viable, I don't think it's enough to hark back to a happier time, you know, when people had a simple life with animals and horses, etc. I think there's probably a need to look at detail in the whole model of agricultural production before, you know, you can really crack the nut of how to live sustainably in a village environment. So connectivity is not just enough. I think the whole relationship with the land around it and with nature and the way in which farming is conceived would need to be looked at as well.
I really like, from a value point of view, this idea of village, because in a lot of trends happening about the future of cities, I think they are capitalizing on people who they really want to belong to a smaller environment where things can become a bit more human in such a, you know, high-paced technology world. So I think the best of both worlds would be really to understand what is pushing those villages for people to really have a pleasant life and understand the life they have, and to try to see how to make that work in, you know, within the society we are designing for the future. But I don't want to get out of this idea that, you know, the villages is still something where I would see a lot of, you know, car company, mayors, quite a lot of people all over the world trying to project, you know, it is a better way of living.
Thank you for joining the Future Now show. Let's go build a better world.